As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
Instead of waking up each morning with this feeling of I'm in debt and I've got the best hope of today, if today goes really well, I might get back up to zero balance in terms of I might have done enough stuff to really feel like I've earned my place on the planet. And then the next day it all resets to the same old debt and you've got to start again. Can you at least entertain the notion that we might start each day at zero and that what you do during the day adds credit to your account? You know, the idea of keeping a done list, keeping a list of things that you do as you achieve them through the day, instead of or as well as a to-do list, which just constantly reminds you about all the things to do. I think we do approach each day with this sense of like, can I get to the point where I just about allow myself to feel okay about myself? And it's no way to live.
That was Oliver Burkeman on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are four experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, the Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hi everyone, this is Michael. In this episode, I'm talking with Oliver Burkeman, and I am very excited about this one as Oliver had become one of my favorite authors. I first heard about him over like 3 years ago, nearly 3 years ago, when Yael and Debbie had interviewed him on his phenomenal book, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. I loved the insights he shares. I liked how he combines wisdom with incredibly funny writing. But Debbie is on vacation in Italy while I'm recording this. So I was wondering who I could record this co-host intro with.
Wait, Michael, could I do?
Yeah, oh, yes, of course.
Oh my God, our timing is just perfect.
What a coincidence. It's so good to see you. So good to hear you.
Amazing to see you. And I'm just so glad that I hopped on this Zoom call just at the time that you were recording this.
It's incredible. So while I have you, Yael, what were your thoughts on this interview?
Oh man, well, I, like you, adore Oliver Burkeman's writing. And I discovered him through one of his earlier books that we haven't had him on the show to talk about, which has the best title. It's called The Antidote: Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking. And this title just embodies Oliver. He's got this really dry wit that I just love. And it comes through in your conversation because both of you are so funny. And for me, this interview is just a very powerful one in helping people to kind of put some of these ideas into action. some of the ideas that he talks about in 4,000 Weeks and in Antidote. And, a big theme is how do we overcome our perfectionistic tendencies and get moving, get acting?
So this is actually something that, yes, perfectionism is definitely something I've recognized as something I need to work on, mostly for my own time management and also mental health to a certain degree. And I am getting better at this. It's still in the forefront of my mind to allow myself to do things imperfectly.
For me, the thing that helps me to be imperfectionistic, and by the way, I'll just note that Oliver Burkeman has a newsletter called The Imperfectionist that's really good if you're interested in his writing and want to get some in your email inbox on a regular basis. Now I'm just kind of selling Oliver Burkeman. I really love his writing. But one of the things that helps me, because I'm not as naturally funny as Michael or Oliver Burkeman, is just to remember how much things feel important in the moment when they aren't really. And one way that I remind myself of that is actually through a tip that I read in a book by Ron Siegel, who we had on to talk about his book, The Extraordinary Gift of Being Ordinary. And he talks about how before giving a talk, one of his friends would always put at the top of it, dead soon, which I think is very in line with Oliver Burkeman's thinking. It's like, life is so temporary. The things that feel so important, you might not remember a week from now. And certainly you won't remember a year from now or 10 years from now. And life is short. And the things that are really, really important are probably not the thing that your mind is getting super hooked on in this very moment. And so by kind of zooming out and remembering the impermanence of life, it gives you some perspective. So we can kind of focus on impermanence as one pathway to getting going. But another point that Oliver Burkeman makes that I think is really important is that the getting going is not just in the absorbing of information and in the preparing, it's really in the doing. And there's often this gap, especially in a culture that is so overwhelmed with information, right? We have podcasts, we have books, we have shows, we have lectures, we have newsletters, we have so many different ways to access so much information. And so it's really tempting to want to absorb as much information as you can before you actually, get moving. I actually have this memory of someone that I was close to when I was a kid watching workout videos and not actually working out and just having this kind of like, there's a difference between the watching and the doing. And it really makes a difference. And so one of the things that, as I understand it, his book really does is guide the reader into small bits of doing. Just the getting going is so important, and doing it with a recognition that it'll be imperfect and actually embracing that imperfection as a way of liberating yourself from just being in this position of paralysis or constant preparation.
When I was going through university, I had a lot of life drawing classes, and my teacher would always tell us that we have 10,000 bad drawings in us and they need to get out as quickly as possible before there's room for the good ones to come out. And you wait forever for the skills to be there before you even get started. Like you're going to paint yourself, pun intended, into a corner. Yeah. And you need to start with that imperfection in mind.
One of my favorite books about writing is Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. And she has this chapter that has just the best header, which is write a SHI blank blank Y first draft. And I always think that when I sit down at my computer, because if you wait until the words are really ready or until the idea is fully formed, you will never be writing. At least I wouldn't. Maybe there is somebody out there who could sit down and write a really nice first draft. It isn't me. And it isn't most of the writers that I know. It's really about getting going and allowing yourself through the process of doing the work to get to a better and better place. And I think it's really about growth mindset, right? It's about being willing to make mistakes and learn as you do, whatever the thing is, and to recognize that there's always better to be had and that the journey is like learning and growing and finding interest in the work that you do or in the play that you do.
Thank you, Yael. What a beautiful segue. And with this, let me bring you all Oliver Burkeman on his book, Meditations for Mortals. Oliver Burkeman is the author of the Sunday Times best-selling 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals, and The Antidote, Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking. For many years, he wrote a popular weekly column on psychology for The Guardian, aptly titled, "This Column Will Change Your Life." His work has also appeared in The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, Psychologies, and New Philosopher. His new book that we're going to discuss today is titled Meditations for Mortals, 4 Weeks to Embrace Your Limitations and Make Time for What Counts. Welcome to the show, Oliver. It's a huge honor to have you here and talk with you about your new book.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. Happy to be here.
So, Meditations for Mortals is a book that's intended to be read 1 chapter a day. And I was reading this book much faster, so my brain felt like it had a sleepover in a fireworks factory. What was the inspiration for that format in the book?
Well, it took a while to emerge. There were versions of this book at some point that were going to be, a page a day for a year or a quote a day, for, all sorts of kind of different paces. But I think that this one in the end was the right one. And I guess the idea that I'm just trying to get at there is I've always been very interested in and preoccupied by this gap between the idea of knowing what you want to be doing with your life and knowing how you want to be living and actually doing it, actually crossing that gap from knowing to doing. And one of the issues there, I think, is that we have a tendency to sort of encounter new knowledge, somebody's book or whatever it might be, and try to sort of gobble it all up and then install it in our brain. Okay, now I've got that module in my head, and it's all going to be great from now on. So I want to sort of challenge that and to sort of suggest that by deliberately pacing it in this way, that might be a way to sort of hold back from that urge, and more generally to kind of let the ideas sink under your skin and into your bones, and that this will be a more effective way of stepping into a different way of being. Obviously, in a book about, letting go of control, I can't expect to be too controlly myself about how people do it. But I think it's useful to have that structure there, that idea of pacing, even if you don't follow it to the letter.
And how do you see this book in regards to your previous book, The 4,000 Weeks? And we had you on the show, was it a year and a half ago?
Something like that.
So this book was a huge success. And how is this Meditations for Mortals? How did that come about? Was this, I think you write in the epilogue of the book that there was a conversation with friends, with people on the internet.
Yeah, I had the chance after 4,000 Weeks sort of took off a bit to talk to all sorts of people in all sorts of contexts about their own experiences of time and of overwhelm and of attempting to build a meaningful life and all the rest of it. And I think one of the things that arose from that, so, in the sense that this book is about human limitation and dealing with our finite natures and building the most meaningful and vibrant lives that we can in that situation. It's in the same vein as 4,000 Weeks. But I guess where I really see the difference is that this book is, I hope, about action and about sort of trying to be something that will impel people to action. And really, that was one of the things that emerged from all those conversations, right? This sense that you can have a really strong sense of how you want to live. Or you could even read a book like I've written, if that's not too flattering to myself, and say that you've developed a different perspective on some aspect of your life. There's still this bit where you have to then live it instead of just think about it.
So I thought this format of having 4 weeks and then the meditation per day to go through so brilliant, because 4,000 weeks, you kind of drop a big knowledge bomb where that just runs counter to everything we learn in the self-development world. In fact, like this book, Meditations for Mortals, starts with, I think the first sentence in the book is, and I quote, "This is a book about how the world opens up once you realize you're never going to sort your life out," end quote. And this is quite ironic because in the 15 years that I spent in the German educational system. Like these 15 years started with a sweet little elementary teacher who stood in front of us and said, okay, kids, we're going to get your life sorted out now. And here comes Oliver Burkeman. It's like, hey, this is actually never going to happen. And I'm going to write one book about it. And then I'm going to follow it up, because this is quite counter to how we learn to see the world, or how we are taught to improve ourselves. So here's the problem that I foresaw in talking with you about the book. There are 28 ideas in there, one for each day. And well, of course, we're not going to be able to talk about all of them. So I thought we can just start with the 4 broad themes, like one big theme for each week. If you could give us a little bit of a summary of how those like build on each other. And then just jump into a couple of those meditations and go into a little bit more detail there.
Sure. And let me say, I also think in some sense, there's only one idea, right? I agree that there are sort of 28 ways in, but I do think that if the book does its job, if I've done my job in this book, they are, while very different, they are just all different ways of getting at this outlook or this approach to life that I label in the book imperfectionism. And it almost, there's an acknowledgement, I hope, in that structure of saying, look, there isn't one way of summing this up. I could probably have written, 200 ways of summing it up if I'd had the time and the skill or whatever. So while you're absolutely right that they all come at this from a different angle, I think if we look at one or two of them, we'll have in some sense looked at them all.
So it's funny that you said you have a hard time like summarizing this book, because I tried to tell my friends what this book is about, and I had a really hard time summarizing it succinctly and be like, this is the idea. Because with each new meditation, there came a new idea. But you're right, like there's a broad idea of imperfectionism, but then there are all those facets that kind of need to come together.
Yeah. So I remember a lovely line from Nassim Taleb, the writer, once. He said that if a book can be summarized into a sort of a 6 bullet points, then it should just be those 6 bullet points. And so there's something I'm quite happy. It's not good for commercial marketing reasons, perhaps, just that you can't summarize the book easily to your friends. But in some another way, I'm kind of flattered by hearing about that. So the book is divided into 4 parts, as you said, and these 4 weeks are called Being Finite, Taking Action, Letting Go, and Showing Up. And the first week of that really sort of is my attempt to kind of throw a bucket of ice cold water over the reader's head and talk about the experience of what it feels like to really sort of face up to the fact of our finite natures, not only how little time we have, but how little control we have over life and how life unfolds. So it's all these ideas that I think of as sort of central to imperfectionism. This idea that it's really I think of it as the outlook on life that starts from the acknowledgement that there will always be too much to do, that you will never feel ready to embark on new parts of your career or new stages in your life, that you will never feel like you've achieved the invulnerability from distressing emotions that lots of people seem to hope that they will get to one day, that you will never get to the part of your life that isn't full of problems. All these different forms of defeat, I suppose, or defeat of our fantasies about what life could be. But also trying in this first week to really establish that, like, this is a strange kind of defeat, right? Because it's not actually dispiriting. It's liberating and empowering. And it's from that ground that you can sort of do the most exciting and impressive and meaningful things that you could ever have done in a much more sort of enjoyable frame of mind. So one of the ways of talking about that in the first week is this idea that, like, it's very empowering to realize that your situation is worse than you think. And that that if you think that it's very, very hard to get on top of all your to-dos, then that's going to be a constant struggle. But if you understand that it's impossible, then something shifts and you see that actually all that really matters is doing the most important things that you can that you do have time for, and being okay with the fact that there'll always be too much to do. If you think that feeling ready to be a parent or to enter a long-term relationship or to launch a new kind of business or something, if you think that feeling totally ready is a big struggle and that lots of people do, but you don't, so you better figure out what they've got and that you haven't and fix this problem, then this is very tormenting. But if you understand that we never feel ready for these things, it's not part of being a human and limited in the ways we are to ever feel completely ready, then suddenly you can say, well, okay, I no longer need to wait till I feel ready. I can just do the thing. And there's something really powerful. There's a writer I quote in the book, Sasha Chapin, who refers to this state of playing in the ruins, sort of how wonderful and sacred, you might almost want to say, it is to fully understand, or at least somewhat fully understand, that all these fantasies of perfection and total control have crumbled. And then now you can do stuff instead of constantly trying to shore up these fantasies. So that's week one.
So you're starting this off, I think at the very, very first meditation in the first week of talking about how when we humans start out with something, first we need to build the system. We need to get habits in place. We need to get apps in place. We need to get like everything in place so we're perfectly in control. Yeah. And then we can perfectly start, which my social circle informs me is the reason I'm never getting anything done, because I have 5 million apps on my phone and never ever actually start doing the mess. So you talk about this metaphor of the kayak and the superyacht. Can you talk a little bit about what that metaphor is?
Yeah, I think this really, I'm glad you brought this bit up, because this is a bit that is worth emphasizing. A lot of the ways that we try to live more meaningful lives or try to make personal change or whatever, I think can have this effect of failing or being counterproductive, because they are ultimately really attempts to feel more in control as opposed to attempts to do more of the stuff that makes us feel most alive. So the classic example, you feel like you've got a novel in you, so you decide you're going to develop a habit of writing for exactly this number of minutes every single day. You turn it into a whole kind of plan to become the kind of person who's always working on their creative writing. And either because it's so intimidating or because it feels like it would be so time consuming or whatever, there are all sorts of reasons why this then triggers procrastination and why you don't do it as a result. And you constantly feel like you haven't got to the place you're trying to get to. Whereas if you could cultivate the ability to just spend 20 minutes today on that project, not every day, maybe it will be every day, we don't know yet, right? It's like to just literally enter that to do that thing in reality, badly, unconfidently, with no confidence that you'll come back and do it again. That's the real skill, because then you're sort of launching yourself into your reality instead of trying to, gather all the armor and the defenses to feel invulnerable in it. So yeah, that metaphor is a way of expressing this. I sort of make the argument that being human is a bit like being in a little one-person kayak on a sort of rough, choppy river. Sure, there are lots of other people in their kayaks too. It's not totally solitary, but we are in some sense on our own. And you're just sort of navigating as best you can. You don't know what's coming next. Things happen, and you've got to sort of steer around them. You don't know what the next stretch of the journey is going to be like ever. Something really bad could happen. You wouldn't be able to know in advance. And it's a very risky and sort of scary and vulnerable situation, but it's also a really kind of thrilling and alive and exciting one. And you're sort of in the situation. And that's what it is like to be human, really, whether we like it or not. But I think a lot of what we're doing when we seem to be trying to implement plans for personal change or make our lives better or whatever, is actually we're trying to make ourselves feel that instead of being on a kayak, we're in a super yacht. I don't claim to be a great expert in super yachts, but I'm picturing a sort of 140 foot, 3 or 4 level craft. And
private chef.
Yes, right.
Private masseuse.
Exactly.
All of the stuff.
And to travel in this way, I claim, for the purposes of this metaphor, is to be on the bridge of this craft in a very serene and quiet place, really having a sense of being on top of things instead of in the thick of them. Programming your destination into the ship's computer and sitting back and letting it go and everything being very sort of plain sailing, I suppose. And it's not that we can live life like that, really. That's not what it is to be a human, to be sort of on top of your life and in control of it. But I think a lot of what we do is to sort of help us try to feel that way. There's nothing wrong with building habits, of course. But a lot of the approaches that we take to habit building are really, I think, attempts to say, like, if I can just find this system that can kind of live life on my behalf, I'll make a deal where I follow the rules of the system. And in return, I don't have to fully show up for life in all the ways that's actually quite uncomfortable. Being more consciously in the kayak is the way to feel alive. And that is what we mean when we say, that was a really good day, or I really feel like I got the most out of this experience of being alive. There's no benefit in the end to sort of tricking yourself into believing you're elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. And the kayak is something that we can grab right now and start with. And I'm thinking of people that actually get on the kayak for fun, and that's their hobby, and they're wild water rafting in a kayak every Sunday because it's freaking fun, compared to those that sit at home for weeks, months, years, saving up for that superyacht that then never ever comes and leads to massive amounts of credit card debt and just trying to get a superyacht together and never ever starting on that novel or whatever the endeavor is that we want to set out, and just make it a little bit messy and wet and cold and kayaky, if that's an adjective. Kayaky.
It is now.
It is now. You heard it here first. Hey, Michael here. As you might have already heard, I'm currently working on a book on confidence building, having better conversations, and making friends. Would you like to work with me to make this happen? I don't know about you, but I like self-development books that aren't just about the theory and the exercises. I like books that are full of real stories and insights from people who have worked through the concepts and have gotten the results they wanted. And that's how I envision my book too. So I'm looking for a handful of coaching clients to work with me over the next couple of weeks. If you struggle with confidence or your social skills, we can work together for 8 weeks in one-on-one coaching sessions that are tailored towards your specific goals. And your story will, anonymously, of course, be featured in my book and help and inspire others. I'm only going to work on this with 10 people, and as a thank you, offer 50% off my coaching package. If you think this is for you, then head over to herold.coach/book and apply. That's all. Back to the show. So you had this concept of the insecure overachiever who has to repay a debt to kind of like earn another day on the planet.
Yeah.
The idea that we have to produce, we have to do, we have to be effective, we have to be insert whatever ambition there is in order to earn our place on this earth.
Yes. This idea of a sort of a deficit that we sort of go through life trying to deal with through productivity, it just feels like a very, very common thing. And whenever I use that phrase, insecure overachiever, in public event or something, you get all these ripples of recognition. People who are driven, people who've done a lot with their lives, people who are probably celebrated to some extent by their friends or family for being accomplished, but who on some level are doing it to shore up a shaky sense of adequacy. And really, I just wanted to draw attention to that idea in that stage of this book, and to say, instead of waking up each morning with this feeling of, well, now I'm in debt and I've got the best hope of today. If today goes really well, I might get back up to zero balance in terms of I might have done enough stuff to really feel like I've earned my place on the planet. And then the next day it all resets to the same old debt and you've got to start again. Can you at least entertain the notion that we might start each day at zero, and that what you do during the day adds credit to your account if you need to think in credit and debt terms at all. I suggest for this purpose, the idea of keeping a done list, keeping a list of things that you do as you achieve them through the day, instead of or as well as a to-do list, which just constantly reminds you about all things that there are yet to do. And I just think it's very useful to perceive the way in which you're going through life trying to sort of earn the right to exist, because usually people don't intellectually believe that, right? I feel like I have a right to exist just by existing. And sure, the more work I do, maybe the more success I have or more money I can have or something, but I don't have to work just to be okay. I don't have to produce just to be sort of acceptable as a human being. And yet we don't live that way. I think we do approach each day with this sense of like, can I get to the point where I just about allow myself to feel okay about myself? And it's no way to live.
Yeah, it's not this idea of if I put in the work, I'm going to have more possibility, I have more projects out there, whatever the ambition is. It's the idea of waking up with a debt.
Yeah.
Like a little, I'm thinking like video game where you have a little number over your head that's like -50. And then you spend your day hustling and producing and doing things so that hopefully by the time you go to bed, you've reached the zero and you're kind of like allowed to go to sleep without feeling all too guilty about wasting air and wasting room and all of that stuff. And then we start the entire race the next day.
Right. Whereas it's at least possible to imagine going through each day, seeing your productivity as an expression of the fact that you already feel good about what you're doing. And, on my better days, that is what I think I do these days. I think I take pleasure in certain kinds of writing and conversation and things like that, because it's like, there's some great ideas to explore here. It's not because if I don't do it, the justification for my existence is questionable somehow.
This is a running joke among us co-hosts on the show, the idea of too much information and the to-read book stack that's like hidden in wardrobes, in rooms, in basements, like this pile of books of shame that still have to be read. And I was laughing so much going through this meditation. I'm not sure if you're supposed to laugh while you meditate, but I think this is fair game.
I give you permission.
Okay, great. The biggest idea for me in what I'll have you expand on this idea of too much information and what to do with it. But what often keeps me from actually tackling a book is this looming guilt that if I read a book, I have to make it count. Mm-hmm. I need to take notes. I need to put those notes into flashcards. I need to review the flashcards, because why would I read a book if I don't like memorize every single lesson that is in the book after I'm putting it down? So what does the great Oliver Burkeman say about our book pile of shame, and how we could look at that instead?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I talk about is this idea, and a different metaphor now, a different analogy, but seeing your to-read pile or the digital equivalent of articles to read later or whatever as a river rather than a bucket, right? As something that just sort of flows past you and is obviously not something you're supposed to capture the whole of. It's an infinite supply, and it's in the nature of infinite supplies that any attempt to sort of consume them all will be very stressful, but also fail. As opposed to a bucket, something we think of as something that has to be emptied somehow. I don't know. In my parents' generation, there are quite a few people you come across who feel that if there's a sort of newspaper or magazine inside their house, they feel obliged to at least check every page before they put it on the recycling.
Oh yeah, you're adding so many things. Like now I remember that I have a pile of bookmarks on my browser, and I have a pile of magazines lying on my table, and they all kind of need to be read. So this problem is much bigger than just my pile of books that I have to read.
Well, it is a lot bigger than that, but it's also so big, in fact, that it's not worth worrying about. And I was just going to say, I sort of tease my parents for that attitude, but actually we're all prone to it in different forms, to saying that like that list of bookmarks, that list of articles in a read it later app somehow has to be gone through. And I don't think it does. I think it can be plucked from, and the others can be left to go by. The thing about needing to retain the knowledge from everything you read, most of what I write about in this book is problems that I've greatly suffered from myself. But in that case, I was lucky, I guess, always to be a bit baffled by this idea that you should try to retain every fact that you read. I'm amazed, sort of looking at YouTube and elsewhere, how many people there are offering, systems and methods to remember everything you read. And I'm always like, why would you want to do that? I think that a big part of what's going on here is there is this desire to sort of take ownership of information in this way and to store it up implicitly for later, right? Implicitly not for now, but for this time in the future when you, the perfectionist, is going to have all the things you need to put things into practice perfectly. And of course, as I quote people saying in the book, a lot of the benefit of reading something important comes from how it is changing you in that moment. It shapes your sensibility and then you're a bit of a different person, and that can be the way that it has its effect. Or if there is some sort of amazing tactic or method that crops up, well, if it's amazing enough, you're going to remember. And I think there is a real risk of sort of just confusing yourself when you try to remember everything you read, because instead of letting things speak to you, you're saying, okay, I'm going to try to memorize a sort of what the author thought was important when they wrote this book. But that's not true to the nature of engagement with a book. So I think it's, not only do we stress out a bit less by treating facts and information as a sort of a river, but actually we probably end up benefiting from them in a more effective way. I mean, obvious caveat, if you're like at medical school or law school or something, there may be lists of things that you have to memorize, right? I'm not saying that never happens, but I think overwhelmingly especially when you're out of higher education at all, this is not a useful way to approach our information glut in the world.
Yeah, if I ever had to go through open heart surgery, I wouldn't want my surgeon to say, I read a book about this once. Still remember a few things. I think it had a picture in it.
Yeah. No. Although I would want a surgeon who was in touch with his or her intuitions, who wasn't trying to sort of replicate other people's experience of being a good surgeon, but who was actually a good surgeon in their own right.
Let's talk about, as if we hadn't done that already, let's talk about problems. First, our own taste for problems, and then ourselves putting an overimportance on the problems of others. So developing a taste for problems. This was a big thing that stood out for me, that again ties into this idea of the kayak, of grappling with something all the time. And is this really what life is all about? And is there a better way of approaching that?
Yeah, there's a very widespread notion. It's sort of implicit in a lot of our attempts at productivity and goal setting and all the rest of it, even if we don't articulate it this way to ourselves, that we sort of assume that there must be a time in our lives coming where we don't have problems anymore, and where life is not characterized by new, unexpected things that demand our attention each day. And I tell the story in the book of Sam Harris, the podcaster and author. He tells the story about sort of some day when he was sort of moaning on to a friend over coffee about all the problems in his business or his life or whatever. And she interrupts him and says, hold on a second, are you still under the illusion you're going to get to the point in your life where you don't have any problem? And he writes very engagingly about realizing, oh yeah, I have been assuming that on some unarticulated, unconscious level. And it doesn't make any sense because, if you think about what a problem is in the broadest sense, it is just a finite human engaging with the world. Anything you do that is worth doing is in some way a problem. It brings you to the limits of your ability to control things. If you could control the whole of life exactly from now until the end of it.
So basically everything outside of me sitting on my couch watching Netflix presents me with a problem.
Some kind of problem, right? Now, I think it's important to stress, I'm not saying that it doesn't matter that some people have much worse problems than others, and there are certain kind of appalling problems that people have in their lives that I would not wish on anybody and hope never to have myself. But the sheer fact of sort of problems per se, you might say, is really just another way of talking about what we're doing here as humans, is solving problems. And I make the point in that chapter that it's kind of funny that we often sort of go through our days in our jobs thinking like, oh, I could do this job so well if I wasn't dealing with all these problems that just keep coming up. And then you go home and you might well do something like learn to play a musical instrument or play a board game with somebody or watch a police drama or read a detective novel. All of these things we do for pleasure that just are pleasurable because we're addressing ourselves to problems in them, right? I mean, and if there was no problem in them, it would just be boring and would not be a good way to spend your free time. And when I talk about developing a taste for problems, I guess I really mean there's something very empowering and sort of absorbing in seeing that, life is a sequence of problems, and that in itself is not a problem. So these two phrases that life is a sequence of problems, and yet at the same time, life is not a problem to be solved, right? These are both true at the same time, and they mean the same thing ultimately. And there's a quote that I use in 4,000 Weeks, my earlier book, from the American Zen teacher Charlotte Jocko Beck, who says, "What makes it unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured." And I love this insight because that really shows, right? The sheer existence of problems is not a problem. The thing that torments us is the idea that we ought to have got rid of all these problems by now and we still haven't. And when you can release your grip on that thought, you can actually do what life is at its best, which is the British idiom that never quite translates even to American, but getting stuck in to problems is what we can spend our lives doing.
Adding something out of my own experience to this is that when I think back over the last weeks, months, like those moments of happiness that really stand out for me, they often came at the end of solving a certain problem. Now, this is, of course, taking into consideration that there are problems out there that are heart-wrenching. And I don't want to compare me learning a new meal with a lot of the horrible things that are going on in the world. And at the same time, looking at the list of problems that are in front of me right now, the idea of each problem that's going to be overcome is going to lead to a significant moment of happiness that I'm not going to get by sitting on the couch and watching another episode on Netflix. That might be contentment, that might be peaceful, but that leaping, laughing, calling friends, saying, I solved it, this is I made it, that comes from that constant influx of problems that my life somehow seems to create. And turns out I'm not the only one who's in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can get engrossed in the solving. You can feel happy about the thing having been solved. You can relish the next one coming along, but only if you are not viewing the existence of the problem in your life as a problem in itself. And I quote there a friend of mine who had this incredible realization for her anyway, when she, after a long period of telling herself that she could do her job really well if only she wasn't dealing with all these problems in the organization, but being struck by the awareness that the problems were the job and the problems were why the job existed. And if everything could just be put on autopilot, then there wouldn't be a job. So I think this is really useful to remember. And it crops up in all sorts of contexts. I don't know if you maybe have encountered this in the context of people are very much looking for ways at the moment, or some people are, ways of taking notes from books and everywhere else that will make the process of writing almost effortless, right? So that you create a big database of quotes and insights and ideas. And then when it comes to writing an article or a book, it's just a question of telling your notes app to assemble them, and it's basically there.
Am I sharing my screen? I'm really scared. Right? I'm sharing my screen as we speak.
And hey,
that's exactly what I'm doing. Yes,
I create these notes, these systems of notes and stuff. But what I've learned is that if you think that what that's going to sort of make the last mile of that process automatic, that's just kind of a mistake. I'm really struck by what Cal Newport says about writer's block, that in many ways that's just the feeling of writing. The fact that there's a hardness to trying to write well is not a problem. That's just what it is.
So now that we, pun intended, solved that problem for once and for all, what about other people? And because it turns out other people have freaking problems as well. And a lot of other people's problems, as the perpetual people pleaser that I am. tend to be my problems as well. So could you shed a light on how we can just have other people have their own problems and then keep minding our own business to a certain degree?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is also pretty widespread, isn't it? And it's funny because you think about the idea of people pleasing. You think of that person as very submissive or timid, and they're sort of saying, well, no, everyone else matters more than me, and I've got to make sure nobody's cross with me or cross about anything. Everyone's happy. It's actually quite self-centered in a funny way, and quite controlly in a funny way, to feel that it's your ability, let alone your sort of obligation, let alone your ability, to get inside everybody's emotional lives in that way, and to make sure that nobody's cross with you or impatient or disappointed.
So you're saying I'm not the center of everyone's universe? That comes a bit as a shock.
I want to be clear. I have not sort of achieved total freedom from any of these things. I did have a moment when I was writing this book where it was late for the deadline, and I became aware that I had in my mind this astonishingly insulting mental image, right, of my editor at the publisher, who is an accomplished person dealing with all sorts of big league writers and all sorts of things going on in his life. But on some level, I'd had this mental image of him just like pacing up and down in his room thinking, where is Oliver's manuscript? As if like, the whole organization was just having meetings all day long saying like, where is Oliver's manuscript? And of course, that's absurd, right? People don't... people are all dealing with their own things and all the rest of it. The other part of that I wanted to emphasize, and I think you were getting at in your question, is not that we should then just ignore other people's sentiments, right? Not that kind of ignore the haters thing where you just sort of try to develop a stance of not caring at all what other people think, but just understanding that other people's emotions belong to them, and that there's something for you to weigh in the balance. You know what I mean? So when you are making your decisions, which as a finite human being is always going to involve trade-offs, every choice you make has some kind of negative consequence. The most obvious version of this, right? If you decide to spend an hour on your work, then you're not spending it with your friends or on your own in glorious relaxation. So we're always making these trade-offs. And I think we just need to learn to put other people's emotions into the mix there. So, for example, the classic case, if I don't answer this email, the person at the other end might get impatient with me. Well, firstly, they probably are dealing with other things, as we've said, and they're not really thinking about your
their own email inbox.
Yeah. But secondly, this is a situational judgment. And quite often I will decide that those emails can wait because it's more important to me to hang out with my son, or especially if I'm keeping an obligation to meet him from school or something, right? That's more important than some other people's emotions. But, to meet the obvious objection, of course, there are people whose jobs entail that when they get emails from certain people in the organization, bosses, they respond quickly. And if you really didn't do that for a few days running, you might lose your job. So there you might say, well, I'd like to keep this job, so I'm going to make the decision in a different direction. But what's so liberating about it, this is kind of an existentialist philosophy point, I think. What's so liberating about it is like, you're still making the decision. You are still getting to choose. You might feel you don't have much of a choice given your values, like keeping my job or something. But technically, nonetheless, you are always just weighing problems and saying, which negative consequence would I like to incur? Because incurring none is not an option.
It's not an option.
And I think why this is so freeing for people pleasers especially is that other people's emotions, because I think of lots of to do with our upbringings and how we're parented, they tend to feel like they're a kind of a sort of force majeure, right? They're a sort of it's not something to be weighed in the balance. It's like if somebody's angry with you or impatient, everything else gets put by the wayside until you placate that person. And I just want to say, no, it matters. I care about what my colleagues and my family and my friends are going through emotionally, but it doesn't have a special status, right? It's just another of these considerations that I want to consider.
something that I've done in my own journey of shedding this shell off being the perpetual people pleaser, and something that I also like to do with clients that I work with that identifies people pleasers as well, is to purposefully, in a sort of like exposure therapy way, almost push some of those buttons that they're very scared of pushing, as in not accommodating other people. And I don't mean this in a rude way or in any form or manner, disrespectful way, but just extending their own comfort zone around people pleasing a little bit by, for example, ordering a coffee in a coffee shop and then maybe turning around, coming back and saying, oh, could you add some sugar? Or could you froth the milk a little bit more? Which will put a lot of people pleasers on like DEFCON 5 when they think about like, how could I potentially do this? Or even walking up to someone and asking for the way to the next subway station. Right. Well, that person clearly knows I have a phone. They will think, why am I not just using my phone? Why do I waste their time? It's like, no, do this. Like expand your comfort zone in that realm just a little bit.
It's so interesting. It's a whole education being British, and my wife is American, and I want to be completely clear, not a kind of stereotypical brusque or, heedless American, someone who is incredibly good at politeness in the British context, but who also will, in a very, very polite way, ask for the things that she wants. And if a meal that's meant to be hot is served cold, will very politely and with an appropriate apology ask if it could be heated up, and even that, you're absolutely right. There's something deep in me. I often think it is partly cultural that just rebels at the very notion of doing that. And, the number of times that I have a bad reaction to that, that someone reacts badly to that, are non-existent. It's people usually respect it.
My reaction to that is oftentimes to just open my eyes wide and go like, wait, you can do that?
Yes, exactly.
I was meeting a friend a few days ago in the park, and he texted me an hour before our meeting time. I said, can we meet half an hour later? And my brain was literally, wait, that's an option? Like I was hustling and just trying to get ready and like skipping lunch just to be there on time. And he just texts me, can I be there half an hour later? So that goes into my mental library of, hey, this is something I can try out next time.
I know we're going too long down this fascinating avenue, but there's a old post on a internet talk board that I wrote about ages ago about the idea of different cultures being either ask cultures or guess cultures. And I don't know if you've come across this distinction, but just the idea that there are social milieus and specifically national cultures where if you want something, you ask for it and you're very happy for people. No one's offended if the person says, actually, no, I can't do that. And then there's guess cultures where you can't ask for something until you're pretty confident that the answer is going to be yes. And so, the typical example is how freeing it would be if we could live in a world where, if I was visiting your city, I could ask you if maybe I could stay in your spare room for 4 days, even though we don't really know each other, because I'd be completely confident that if that was ridiculous to you and you didn't want to or made you feel uncomfortable or you were busy, you'd say, no, thanks for asking, but you can't. Whereas in Britain, you have to know that the invitation will be responded to positively. Yes, right.
And the people pleaser in me is already scared that I might get an email from you tomorrow asking that very question. So I might spend the rest of the day just cleaning up my place. But
it's a cliche of British tourists sort of traveling the world that they make friends with people and say, you should come and visit us in Yorkshire, in London, in Oxford. And then if someone ever actually did that, they would just be met with total horror.
So let's wrap this up with the part where you talk about starting from sanity. And the reason I highlighted this one in the notes that I should or should not have taken is that it's very much in line with the acceptance and commitment therapy approach that many of the co-hosts on the show use day to day. Before I go into the overlap of your concept and acceptance and commitment therapy, walk us through how do we actually start from a point of sanity?
This is just my phrase for an orientation that I think, crops up in lots of different places in the literature and psychology. And I'll be really interested to hear about how it works in acceptance and commitment therapy. Sanity, I'm just using as a placeholder for the way that you would like your life to be. So you might say things like calm and not anxious, productive in a meaningful way, rich social connections, lots of opportunity for rest, all these things. And it's just very easy to see that as something that, even though we might have a bit of it in our lives at the moment, we're sort of striving towards the state where we have lots of that. So, I'm working really hard because one day I hope to have enough financial security to be like X. I really am burned out, so I need a rest. So I'm going to work really, really hard for the next 6 months to get everything off my plate, and then I'm going to take a sabbatical. What ends up happening is that you end up doing the opposite of the thing that you're looking for, because you're trying to get all this other stuff out of the way or change yourself into that person. And what I mean by starting from sanity is that would be the approach that says, if I would like more rest in my life, what is a way that I could incorporate that into today? Or if I want to make fewer commitments to meetings and things, are there any that I could actually try to negotiate myself out of today, instead of claiming that in the future I'm going to be more disciplined about saying yes to things? And the shift that really helps for me is seeing your values and the way you want to be in life as a place to start from, instead of a place you're trying to get to. There's a writer I quote called Richie Norton who reduces it to 2 steps. It's like 1, decide who you want to be. 2, act from that identity immediately. And I think that really sums it up in a nice way. It's crucial, if you're going to do that, then to have a very sort of imperfectionist approach about it, right? Because maybe you've only got 5 minutes for a rest today. Maybe your experience of trying to be a more attentive spouse today is going to be quite stumbling and a bit amateurish, right? So you have to be very, very forgiving. But the enormous difference is you're actually living it instead of fantasizing about living it later.
Yeah, and that is exactly the acceptance and commitment therapy approach as well. That things start with behavior, and that that our life is organized by what is important to us, our values, our goals, and not how we're necessarily thinking or feeling. That we're prioritizing the behavior in line with our intended future self over, hey, this is what I'm actually thinking and feeling in the moment, though. So if you want to be someone who goes out and talks to people, then you start out by going out there and talking to people, regardless of what the thoughts and the emotions are that show up as you go after that. And then, of course, there are a lot of techniques and practices and processes that help you deal with those thoughts and emotions that get in the way. But it all starts more or less with you going out there, opening your mouth and starting to talk to people. Yeah. So you start from the place where you actually want to be, which ironically puts you exactly where you want to be in the first place.
Yes. I think it's so powerful, and we are, or at least many of us, are so designed to think, I'm going to figure this out first, then I'm going to change myself in a certain way.
And we talk
at that
again
point,
20
I will
years
be
later.
ready to act differently.
Yeah. And then we're all, at the same spot 50 years later, and nothing has changed. Exactly. Oliver, thank you so much. I wish I could talk with you for 3 more hours, but it looks like I'm going to have you on my couch sooner or later anyway. So that works. Is there anything we've left out? Anything that you'd like to add before we wrap this up?
No, not really. I think we've given a good broad coverage of the different areas of the book. Yeah, I think it's great.
Excellent. And thank you very much for your time and for your excellent book, Oliver. It's been a huge pleasure and a huge honor.
Thank you very much. I have really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.